Next, I want to kind of turn attention to a question that might be on many of your minds, and that is, with what we've seen happen in our financial markets lately, can we trust carbon markets? Well, this is a very important question. It's one we're working on from two perspectives. One, from the perspective of regulatory oversight. We're now having a conversation in Sacramento about providing regulatory oversight of any cap-and-trade program that's developed under AB 32. We are similarly having this conversation in D.C. And the last is the idea of bringing benefits directly to communities through our cap-and-trade mechanism. I've called this community crediting for reductions, and I'm going to jump now to the next slide to describe that concept very briefly. It basically says that right now, the way our cap-and-trade program is conceived, it's really going to be directed towards our large industrial interests, our utility interests, our refining interests. They're going to be about 85% of emissions in 2020, and we're going to put all of them within a cap-and-trade program. And the question is, can we imagine a way for small dispersed reductions, such as small businesses or households, to take actions that reduce emissions and to aggregate those reductions for sale in carbon marketplaces? I'll finish with slide 21, which shows this concept in 3 simple steps. It's a concept that EDF is now piloting and examining from a technical perspective, that is, to what extent would such a mechanism be feasible technically, that is, can we ensure the environmental integrity of such a program, and to what extent would it be feasible from an economic perspective. To the extent that these are net economically beneficial activities, such as energy efficiency investments or reducing our reliance on transportation fuels, they will be good for both the household and the small business, and they will also help to bring a lot of people into the program who we'd like to see as part of the program to ensure its success. With that, I will turn the table over to Kevin Kennedy, and again, I welcome questions and input on everything I've said today. Thank you.
I want to start with what we see as a very big success story for California's environmental leadership. One of the things that we did even before AB 32 was passed was California adopted what are called the Clean Car Standards to establish greenhouse gas emission limits for automobiles in California. We saw that as an important step that builds on some of the environmental leadership that California has traditionally had. We've always had the ability under the Clean Air Act to go a bit further than the federal government and have had a lot of success both environmentally and economically in being able to do that. In implementing these standards, we had to actually fight the federal government and the automakers for a long time. But with the new administration in D.C., the federal government has largely embraced the sort of stringent standards that California was looking at for vehicles. This sort of model is what we're hoping to accomplish more broadly with AB 32, where California can take a leadership position, help plow the ground for showing what's possible for addressing greenhouse gas emissions, and look to the federal government and internationally for others to follow in our footsteps. This is a problem that to address, we're going to clearly need international action, not just action in California. But we definitely see what we're doing in California is providing a model and a useful stepping stone to the rest of the country. So let me turn to some of what we are in the process of doing here in California. One of the first things that AB 32 called for the Air Board to take on was developing what we call the scoping plan, which is basically the blueprint for how we will accomplish the goals of the bill, which are very much focused on getting the emission reductions we need to get back to 1990 levels by 2020, but to do it in a way that keeps an eye on the longer-term sort of reductions that Dr. Fine mentioned are needed to deal with the environmental goals of addressing climate change, 80% reduction by 2050. So we did adopt the scoping plan last year. Broadly speaking, we looked at a comprehensive approach that included sort of as something of a foundation, a cap-and-trade program that would establish a firm limit on the emissions in California for 85% of the sources in the state, but give people flexibility in terms of seeking out the cheapest reductions for how to live within that limit. But we recognized that that sort of market program wasn't going to be the only thing that we need, that we needed what we call complementary measures. There's a lot of opportunity in energy efficiency, renewable energy, dealing with the transportation fuel system, areas where the cap-and-trade system may help but don't necessarily get the sort of reductions that we need both for 2020 but also to put in place the infrastructure we need to get further reductions past 2020. So we included both the cap-and-trade and these other complementary measures. Next slide. So with the scoping plan behind us, what we've turned to this year and next year is going ahead and actually implementing the plan that we laid out. In terms of the cap-and-trade program, we are working with a number of other states and Canadian provinces to develop a regional market system. We think that that sort of regional system helps address some of the concerns about competitive effects if California is acting alone. So we're acting with a number of other states and provinces, and also provides a larger geographic scope to find the least cost reductions that will help get most cost effectively the environmental goals met. We're also continuing to look at the economics of how we're addressing the scoping plan and the public health impacts. Dr. Fine mentioned some of the work that we did last year. We're in the process of updating those analyses to take a closer look, in part to address where we are in the economic cycle, certainly not where we expected to be last year when we were putting the plan together, and how we move forward from there. We're also in the process of working on a number of rules and regulations that we've been taking to the board this year and will continue through the end of next year, taking them to the board. Some of the activities, some of the areas, ARB is not necessarily the state's expert, so we've been working with other state agencies and a wide variety of stakeholders as well in terms of making sure that the folks with the right expertise are helping implement the different pieces of the plan as we go forward. Next slide. One of the things that is extremely important, and Dr. Fine highlighted this throughout his presentation, is the role that energy efficiency needs to play in meeting the sort of goals that we're talking about. And this is another area where California has long been a leader, and we have been reaping a lot of economic benefit through the decades from the emphasis that California has put on energy efficiency, both in terms of building standards and appliance standards, and also efficiency programs run by utilities and others. You can see from this graph that if you look at the per capita electricity use in the United States over the last several decades, it has continued to rise through most of that period, while it has remained basically flat in California. That flat per capita energy use has meant that while there's somewhat higher rates in California, that the bills that people are paying are not higher than they are in other parts of the country. So the energy efficiency pays back over time. And though we've already done a lot in California on energy efficiency, there's a lot more that can still be accomplished and is going to be some of the most cost-effective ways of getting the greenhouse gas reductions that we need.